Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1273, Collapse. Sonny. Wake up. Sonny opened his eyes and tensed. Sensing the world through the shadows, he couldn't feel any danger, but there was urgency in Nef's voice. Something was wrong. As his mind entered a state of battle readiness, he pushed himself off the ground and briefly studied the fissure. It was still night, so everything was enveloped in deep darkness. That darkness, of course, could not hinder his sight. Sonny saw every detail of their small camp and of the weathered walls of black rock surrounding it. Everything seemed fine. Saint, who was guarding them from high above, was also calm. He turned to Nephi's and asked, "What is going on?" She pressed a finger against her lips and whispered, "There was a sound." The next moment, he heard it too. A dull, echoing crackle that came from somewhere below, spreading through the rock in a subtle vibration. Like a stone breaking. He frowned. What is this? Sonny and Nephi's froze, listening to the eerie sounds coming from within the carapace of the black turtle. They had not dared to venture there after salvaging the meat. The shell had been hollowed out, but they didn't know by how much, and even though they had heard the sounds of nightmare creatures inside the carcass of the great monster from time to time, this crackling was entirely new. A small whirlwind of sparks appeared in the air, manifesting into a softly glowing paper lantern. Placing it on the lid of the covetous coffer, Nephi's lowered her head and pressed her ear to the ground. There was another cracking sound, and she suddenly flinched. At the same time, Sonny's pupils narrowed as he noticed something that was out of place in their fissure. A small, thin crack appeared on the floor of the ravine. Just as Nef flinched, it suddenly grew, spreading through the black rock in both directions. Then, it climbed a few meters up the wall, and when the cracking noise disappeared, a small piece of rock splintered and tumbled down. Nef's face suddenly grew pale. "I think it's going to Brea." Before she could finish, there was another sound, this one so loud that it was almost deafening. Sonny felt the ground suddenly shift under him, and then the entire island shook violently. "It's breaking." Before he even knew what was happening, Sonny jumped. As Nephi's and he soared into the air, the floor of the fissure below them suddenly split and collapsed, revealing a vast cavern of darkness and crimson flesh below. Their small camp was instantly swallowed. Except for the memories like the coffer that were dismissed and disappeared in a whirlwind of sparks, everything else, the fire pit, the sleeping bag, the bed made of soft moss, and the rest of it, fell into the darkness in a rain of stone shards. But the collapse was not over yet. As Sonny collided against the vertical wall of the fissure and grabbed onto the rocks, the walls tilted, too. A horrible stench of blood entered his nostrils, and he saw the small crack he had noticed before expanding. Countless new ones appeared, as well, and the entire ravine suddenly moved. God damn it. Struggling to outrun the disaster, Sonny pushed himself off the wall and jumped higher. He was aiming to repeat the process and send himself to the surface with the next jump, but the spot that he was aiming for suddenly broke off and plummeted down in an avalanche of stone. Cursing, Sonny manifested the shadows to create a foothold instead. A split second later, he flew out of the fissure, rolled on the ground, then dashed back to its edge and grabbed Nef's hand, helping her climb out. As soon as they rolled away in a heap, the entire edge split off and crumbled down. A panic thought that the entire island was falling apart entered Sonny's mind. However, the devastation was not as absolute. As the two of them watched, the landscape of the black turtle's shell was changing. It seemed that the schism originated from the location below the central region, where their camp had been located. Wide cracks spread through the black stone, and a wide surface either crumbled entirely or at least sank, forming deep craters. The rest of the island was affected, too, but to a smaller degree. It was just a chain reaction that forced the ground to tilt and slide into the water by a few meters. Nevertheless, their shelter was still afloat. Sonny belatedly realized that he was practically laying on Nephi's. Their limbs were entangled, and both of them were covered in stone dust. Struggling to breathe, he slowly pushed himself away and stood up. A couple moments later, she followed. Standing dazedly above the newly formed pit, Sonny and Nephi's looked down with bleak faces. Their camp, where they had spent so many peaceful nights, was gone. Much worse, the dark island was showing signs of breaking apart. It was just a part of the central region today, but there would be more collapses in the future. Eventually, the entire shell would crumble, leaving them stranded and lost in the sea of deadly abominations. After almost a month of peace, they finally reached a true crisis. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Eventually, he broke the silence. "We need to get off this island." Nephi's lingered for a moment. "Yes. But how?" Sunny looked away with a dark expression. He didn't know. It was not as if they had not been preparing for this inevitable situation. They had tried to come up with a feasible plan dozens of times. However, there was no such plan to come up with. The azure serpent was still waiting for them in the water, and the dark butterfly was still ruling over the sky. Worse than that, many more abominations were prowling the surrounding waters, including the harrowing swarms of krill. If the island sank, they were going to die. If it didn't sink, the azure serpent would eventually be killed, and they would be devoured by either the monstrous butterfly or some other great nightmare creature. There seemed to be no escape. Staring into the pit filled with stone rubble, Sunny sighed. Now, it finally feels like a real nightmare. A sad smile appeared on his pale face. Chapter 1274, Time of Truth. The 7 suns were shining in the azure sky. Sunny was sitting close to the slope of the island, staring fixedly at the flowing water. His eyes were dark and tired. With the temporary camp destroyed, he felt strangely homeless. Much worse, neither he nor Nephi's had managed to come up with a viable solution for their fatal problem. They had considered many things. Every memory in their possession had been studied and examined, but none of them, nor any combination of them, revealed a way out of the perilous situation. The best they could hope for was prolonging their stay on the carapace of the black turtle, somewhat. They could use the dark shaper to try and repair the cracks in the stone shell. There were other unreliable measures, as well. But that would just buy them a few more days, at most. There were other memories that they could use to try to escape. But attempting escape was tantamount to suicide. The great nightmare creatures guarding both the water and the sky were not something they could outrun. Then, there were Sunny's shadows. He had once thought that Saint was their best hope of slaying the azure serpent. However, after witnessing the mad beast in battle, he didn't think that the taciturn knight could achieve such a feat anymore. Not only because she could not enter the water, but also because his plan to augment her with both the shadows and the white flames had been crushed. Saint could not receive the blessing of the fire. Or rather, she could not reap its full benefits. The augmentation had worked perfectly fine in his basement before could not reap its full benefits. The augmentation had worked perfectly fine in his basement before the southern campaign, but Saint underwent a fundamental transformation after that. She was now a devil whose body and soul were infused with elemental darkness. And while true darkness somehow worked in tandem with Sunny shadows, it refused to accept Neph's light. Saint could either use one or the other. In any case, the result was not nearly as powerful as Sunny had imagined it to be. They could bestow the power of Shadow Flame on his other transcendent devil, though. Sadly, Imp was not nearly as formidable of a warrior as Saint. On top of that, the little bastard was in a coma. Or a food coma, at least. The scrawny goblin had finally stopped devouring the tarnished silver and fell into a deep slumber. Sunny had a hunch that after the great mass of mystical metal was fully digested, his gluttonous fiend would grow much stronger. But there was no telling how long it would take, so he sent Imp into the nurturing black flames of his soul to complete the evolution in peace. In any case, Imp was of no help for now. The same went for Nightmare. The tenebrous steed had loyally guarded their dreams and subjugated a good number of them, but he was still an awakened terror. Even if the black stallion managed to unlock his terror ability, he was no match for a great beast. Let alone a great monster like the dark butterfly. So, Sunny and Nephs had no tools that could help them escape from the shell of the black turtle. Which was why Sunny was sitting on the cold stones and staring aimlessly at the water. The water was much less cloudy than it had been before. The vivid red color had receded, turning pale pink. The black turtle only had so much blood, after all, and by now, most of it had dissolved in the endless current of the great river. As he looked, the water suddenly foamed, and a giant serpentine head rose from its depths. A familiar gaze pierced him, brimming with hatred and madness. The azure serpent did not look too good. Just like the carcass of the black turtle, which had once seemed grand and indestructible, was now pitiful and hollow, the great beast was in a dire state. One of its cloudy eyes was gone, replaced by a bloody hole. Half of the terrifying fangs in its obliterating maw were either cracked or broken. Whole chunks of flesh were missing from its long neck, revealing red meat and white bone. And yet, the azure serpent was undeterred. It was just the same. Its fury was the same, its hunger was the same, and its mad determination to kill the two humans was the same. The great beast stared at Sunny, and Sunny stared at the great beast. "Aren't you a persistent one?" His voice sounded grim and hoarse. Sunny remained silent for a while, then suddenly spat, "But what do you even know? Do you think you're so special? I know fury, too. I know hunger, too. I know madness, too. Oh. And I've killed plenty of creatures more powerful than me, too." A dark smile appeared on his face. "Who are you to dare stare me down, beast? I am lost from light, who was born from the shadows. I am the rightful heir of death and the bastard son of fate. Wherever I go, ruin follows. If you had any sense, you would have run away as soon as you saw me." He shivered slightly, then sighed. "Ah. But it's too late now. What a pity." Standing behind him, the Sin of Solace laughed with disdain. "Wow. What a speech. What are you, an 8th grader?" Ignoring the apparition, Sunny looked away and stood up. There was only one way to leave the island. He had known it for a long time, but felt reluctant to admit it. However, there was no time to lie to himself anymore. Now, it was the time for the truth, no matter how hideous and terrifying it was. Walking through the crumbling landscape of the dark island, Sunny found Nephi's. Despite everything, she was still practicing with her sword. The lethal blade, and its master, were both beautiful. The world of the great river was lethal and beautiful, too. Sensing his approach, Nephi stopped and glanced at him with a composed expression. Sunny took a deep breath before coming to stand next to her, looking into her eyes. "I have something to say." She nodded slowly. "What is it?" Sunny lingered for a moment, then offered her his hand. "Give me your flame." "All of it?" Nephi's frowned slightly, a hint of concern appearing in her striking gray eyes. "Why?" He looked at her silently for a while, thinking. Sunny had told the old snake that ruin followed wherever he went. But, really, he was the one following ruin around most of the time. The two of them followed each other, unable to separate, just like a shadow and a star casting it could not be separated. They were quite a pitiful pair. Eventually, he steeled his resolve. "Because I am going to kill the azure serpent."